Hello guys, today we continue the topic of processes of creating Laravel project from start to finish. This is a part 2 video, continuing on part 1 from last week. If you haven't seen that 16-minute video, I will link that in the description below. But to recap, we are running through the newest course of Laravel project from start to finish, talking about things around the code, not just Laravel code. So what you need to do to deploy a project, to make it maintainable and pleasant to work within the team. So in the first video, we talked about actionable plan, GitHub branches issues, and automated tests with feature branches. In this video, I will summarize the rest of the section 1, which is released already on Laravel Daily as a course. The link to the full course will be in the description below, including the repository we're talking about. This is available for premium members, and on YouTube, let's summarize the main things about GitHub Actions, styling with Pint, Larastan, and deploying to AWS with Laravel Forge. Let's start with GitHub Actions. It became the #1 popular thing to automate some stuff when doing pull requests or pushes to branches. So it allows you to run some processes, including automated checks that we will run now, checking the pull request validity and quality before human. And the most typical scenario for GitHub Actions is running automated tests automatically. So you may even skip running them locally. I don't advise that, but you can do that in favor of GitHub Actions doing that for you on the virtual servers on GitHub and then providing the result, whether it's a green light to merge pull request or there's a check that is failed. GitHub Actions is free to an extent, so it has storage and minutes limited. Minutes is basically how many minutes the servers are executing your code and your processes. But in our case, we are on the free plan, so that would work for smaller projects. All you need to do to enable GitHub Actions is to create a file in a folder .github, workflows, and then YML extension for the file. And we will follow the same process as in the first video, so creating GitHub issue for the things that we want to achieve, which is GitHub Actions, then a feature branch for that GitHub Actions, and then inside that branch, we push the .yml file with instructions. This is the contents of that YML file. I will not comment them in detail because the video is already too long. So you may read about that separately, what's inside. Basically, it's running Ubuntu, setting up PHP 8.2 in this case. You may maybe choose 8.3, doing composer install .env, basically installing that Laravel application and then running PHP artisan test. And if that fails, then the check would be considered as failed with X mark instead of successful check mark. So then we commit that, push to the feature branch, and then try to merge into dev. And this is exactly what will happen, that X marks that the check has executed but failed. And if we click on that X, we see the details why it failed. The error is connection refused to MySQL. We didn't install MySQL in our script above here. And you have a choice to install MySQL or to use SQLite. So then on our feature branch, we went to a few more iterations with that .yml file. For example, we created specific .env.ci with SQLite configured, so it wouldn't conflict with .env or .env.example. It's a separate kind of for GitHub Actions, and what we're doing here is CI/CD, the classical thing of continuous integration and continuous deployment. So those automations are part of that process. Another iteration of the fix was to create the SQLite database. Those are, by the way, comments from Torchlight. They shouldn't be visible. A bug to fix in the highlighter of the code. And then after this commit, still failed with error message of Vite manifest not found. So we need to also add npm commands. In this way, you continue iterating on your YML file until the setup of your project is complete, proper, and running. So probably the final thing, the final change in our YML is run npm install and npm run build. And then, after a few commits in the same feature branch, we finally see the check mark as completed, successful, tests have been executed successfully and returned no errors on the virtual server of GitHub. So with this simple example, the idea is this: you create YML file, all multiple files in the workflows, and then each time you make a pull request, or you can define the rule when they are executed, those processes, GitHub Actions will do that for you automatically to prevent potential bugs going into the merge of pull request. So with that, when we have the GitHub Actions set up, we will add 2 more tools into that code quality check on the pull request, which is Laravel Pint and Larastan. I also emphasized in this course a few paragraphs about why now. So those automated tools in the very beginning, in the first features of the projects, may seem like an overkill, and no one has time for that in the beginning because we need to deliver to the client quickly. But actually it's the most logical time when to set up those automations, because then with each iteration, with each new feature, it would already benefit all the future features and deployments. And also you don't have much code yet, so there's nothing to fix in order to those tools to run successfully. And finally, those tools will get you into habits. So that course is also about habits, both personal habits and processes of your team. The habits, how you should run the code according to the standards and guidelines of your team or of this specific project. So with Laravel Pint, it's actually installed by default in the latest Laravel versions. So all you need to do is to configure which preset to use for your code styling. And again, we create a GitHub issue for that. We create a feature branch, and then in that feature branch, all we do is add pint JSON with preset Laravel. It's not the official one. It's not required. You can choose other presets or customize your own. You can read the documentation of Laravel Pint for that, but this is kind of the easiest default way. And then in our GitHub Actions, we add another YML file to run Pint. So similar setup, and at the end, vendor bin pint with test. So then on that GitHub action, something like this would be executed. So this is the local result of what was detected as kind of bad styling. Not bad styling, but something to improve, like for example, space here, like for example, space between the lines, and a few more details. So in this lesson, we added Pint to the GitHub Actions to the automation. In the same fashion, we add another popular tool called Larastan for static analysis. It would detect some issues with like type mismatch, with parameter mismatch, with something called incorrectly, so detect potential issues during runtime. And on Laravel Daily, we have a separate full course about Larastan and static analysis. I will link that in the description below if you want more details. But basically the same workflow. GitHub issue, check out feature branch. In that feature branch, we install Larastan and configure that. We've chosen level 9. In fact, my colleague Modestas chose level 9. In my personal opinion, it may be too strict for the beginning. You can choose lower level if you wish, but this is the configuration. And then we commit and push to feature branch, and again, pull request and merge. And then after running that thing, we may see the improvements. This is the result of Larastan executed. Something with return types, something with traits, something with the contents of array. So kind of overall check. And then again, we add that to GitHub action at the end with another YML file for Larastan check. And then when we push that and try to make a pull request, again, we see the check mark from GitHub Actions with successful check. Larastan executed without any errors. Then in the next lesson of this course, I will actually skip it, but the goal for that is to have second CRUD repeating everything we've learned so far. So the process of how to deal with new feature. This is basically what you need to know, and I already repeated that throughout this video a few times. I would just maybe add that for each new feature you should write tests. We covered that in the part 1 of this video. And also you should run Pint and Larastan locally before committing the code probably. You may skip that, but then the GitHub action runtime, as I said, it is limited in minutes to run, so maybe you will bump into issues with used limitations of GitHub if you don't fix the Pint and Larastan errors and warnings locally before committing your code. And then the final lesson in this course so far is pushing to staging, because the first goal, the first milestone is to show something to the client for their first feedback. And at this point, we need to deploy our project somewhere, basically anywhere. We don't need the domain name, we don't need the fancy deployment features. So for that, you may choose any hosting or any tool, but our personal preference is to use Laravel Forge to save time. Laravel Forge is not a free tool, but it allows you to create a new server on AWS or DigitalOcean or other providers without even looking at terminal even once. Everything is in the UI of Forge. So let me demonstrate in this list of screenshots. So we've chosen AWS as provider. Beforehand, we create a Laravel Forge account and give credentials both to GitHub, to the repository, and to our AWS account. So to create the server, the droplet, the instance of EC2, all you need to do is pick a few drop-downs, pick basically which size of the server. For example, we've chosen t3.small, which is maybe even too big for this testing project. At the time of shooting this video, it costs $15 per month. Probably we could go lower than this. That's your personal choice. Basically, Forge is another layer on top of your providers of servers, which may be DigitalOcean, for example. We've chosen AWS just for the fact that you should learn AWS in general because it's part of a lot of job descriptions for Laravel developers. Employers and company founders want you to work with AWS. And in this case, the deployment process is abstracted in Laravel Forge, but if you do want to do that manually, we have a separate course, Deploy Laravel Project on AWS EC2. For that, you will need a lot of Linux knowledge, how to set up PHP, web server, configure everything and stuff like that. So that is step by step in quite a few long lessons, and I will link that in the description below. But now with Laravel Forge, we just choose the size of the server, then that process begins, takes roughly 5 to 10 minutes, and then as soon as it is completed, you get the email with first credentials for SSH if you want to use them, but you don't have to, just save them somewhere safe. Then on that new server, we create a site, it's called site, basically a website, with attaching that to GitHub repository. So you just put in the GitHub repository and your branch. In our case, it's a dev branch for now, and then it is installed from GitHub. And this is the success page, how it looks. So by now, you already have server installed with PHP and everything needed for Laravel, and your project installed from GitHub. Basically, you go to public IP address and you see Laravel homepage. I'm not affiliated with Laravel Forge, but we use it in our team all the time to create testing servers, live servers, and configure their features like PHP versions, SSL certificates, queues, other drivers, everything you would need for Laravel. Next, we have an error. If we go to login page of our project, we see server error 500. So the default deployment script of Forge isn't enough for us. We need to add a few more things. So Forge is not only for setting up server, but also making deployments. You can click deploy manually or enable quick deploy, which will automatically run that deployment script whenever something is pushed to the branch or pull request. And this is the default script by Forge, basically pulling down the branch, compose or install, restarting FPM, and then migrations. But we need to add a few more things to that, like artisan down to maintenance mode. It's not exactly zero downtime deployment. For that, you would use something like Envoyer or other tools, but we don't want anything to happen with our project during the deployment. That's why we go artisan down into maintenance mode, and then we'll run more commands here like npm install and npm run build, and also at the end php artisan up to get out of maintenance mode. And now our login page works. The last thing to configure is queues. In our project, we have a job sent into the queue. So Laravel Forge, again, allows you to configure the queue in visual UI way without touching the terminal. And that's it. At this point, we have set up the project. This one, you can send the IP address to the client and wait for their first feedback. And this was the actual milestone, the first milestone of this course, Laravel project from start to finish. Now we're busy working with section 2 and section 3, which is basically going to live and then putting the app into maintenance mode and how to deal with that after going live. If you have any questions or ideas about those topics or the ones that I've mentioned in this video, as usual, we can discuss everything in the comments below. The link to this course, if you want to read it in full and if you want the access to the repository, will be also in the description. The final reminder, today is Monday, Cyber Monday, so the last day when you can access the Laravel Daily membership with discount for Black Friday, 40% off yearly or lifetime membership with coupon code Friday24. The last day, tomorrow, that code will expire. That's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.